Hey everybody, Dave Whitmarsh here again for the first session today. It's Ditch Your Outdated Diversity and Inclusion Programs, 5 strategies to create real change. Today's presenter is going to be Maureen. So I haven't actually seen this presentation, but I can tell you that I have followed some of Maureen's interviews that she's been running on LinkedIn and seen them, and just absolutely love them and really looking forward to this. So without any further ado, we'll throw you over to Maureen and let her get going here.
David, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to share just some small shifts that you can make in your programming to make real change. And I'll say this up front. I'll say it at the back as well. I'm probably going to mention a whole bunch of tools. You can reach out to me after for those. I tend to get really excited about this topic, so I will get rolling. So we have been doing this work for years and years and years. And what we have found to be true is that most people are what we call NBC, nice but clueless, right? They want to do the right thing when it comes to being inclusive with their coworkers. They just don't have the right language. They don't have the right tools because this is not something that we teach in school. Right. And so their intentions are really good. But what is also true and really important is it's actually impact that matters. So it doesn't matter if my intention was good, if I'm making somebody feel othered. And there's been a lot of focus on, oh, but they didn't mean it. Doesn't matter when you look at the statistics around, 87% of employees are not engaged. And a good 20% of those are actively disengaged, right? So they're like a toxin in your companies. We know how expensive turnover is. If you look at the data around any underrepresented groups, whether that's women, BIPOC, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, we're just not succeeding when it comes to the workplace. So intention may be good, impact is what matters. And so we really need to shift the conversation overall to having every single individual person understand their role in inclusion. And I don't know about you, David, but I've seen just a lot of people, a lot of organizations scrambling in this last year with all of the events that happened to bring in more diversity into their companies.
Yeah, it's definitely more than a trend. It's a
Right.
real issue.
And here's what's problematic about that. If you bring in people from across the diversity spectrum and you put them in toxic environments, it's going to be a really expensive proposition for you, right? Because you're going to spend all this money recruiting and those people are going to stay. I predict in about a year to 18 months, we're going to see a spike in turnover. And I think we're actually going to see a spike in lawsuits. And so you actually have to do both. So diversity and equity are really handled at the leadership and the systems level, right? Who are we bringing in? What's our pay equity? What are our promotion practices? Inclusion and belonging, it's you and I all day long. And so if you're spending the money, the time to bring in diverse talent, you better be focused on inclusion. And that's really what we'll focus on today, is how you shift people from understanding their intent doesn't equal their impact and what their role is in inclusion. There is a lot of money being spent on poor programming. Because again, this is like intentions are good. We tend to go back to, let's send people through training. Let's send people through training. When it comes to traditional, we call it spray and pray training, right? You spray the training and pray something sticks. Again, the statistics say that doesn't work. 70% of new information is forgotten within 24 hours, and it just goes downhill from there. And in fact, we know that when we're talking about behavior change, which is what inclusive behaviors are, right? It's day in, day out, how I'm acting. That you can't fix that with training. So you can't change that with training. So for example, we say that being inclusive and having an inclusive culture is like leading a healthy lifestyle, right? When I'm leading a healthy lifestyle, it's a set of choices that I make all day long, every day. What am I going to eat? How much sleep am I getting? How am I managing my stress? All of those things are subtle, tiny choices day in, day out. I don't get to do 400 sit-ups on Saturday, eat a bag of carrots and say I'm healthy, right? All day long, every day. Same thing with inclusion and inclusive cultures. So I want you to shift away from thinking about this as being programmatic and something that you can drive either through bringing in a bunch of diverse talent or going with, okay, we're gonna send everybody through unconscious bias training, half day, and check that box. Instead, let's make the shift. And I'm going to go through 5 things that you can do. But before we do that, I actually want to tell you a quick story of a weekend that I had pre-COVID, just because it was pretty spectacular. So on Saturday, I spent the day with a CEO, a chemistry professor, and a firefighter. And then on Sunday, I spent the day with 2 Team USA athletes. Both have been to the games, record holders. So it was just like this phenomenal weekend. When I talked about Saturday and spending the day with a CEO, a chemistry professor, and a firefighter, you probably were not imagining 3 women. These are my college roommates, Kelly, Terry, and Shannon. And when I talked about 2 members of Team USA, been to the games, record holders, you probably were not thinking about 2 people with disabilities, probably certainly weren't picturing a Black man. And that's actually my daughter, Riley, leaving the pool at the Rio Paralympic Games. What I just anchored us in, and what is one of the very first strategies that I want to anchor us in, is the neuroscience of inclusion and understanding what unconscious bias is. It's those subtle things all day long about what do I think a CEO looks like, or what do I think an elite athlete looks like, to that are, again, every day, all day long. And there's been a lot of really controversial stuff put out around unconscious bias. Let's ground it in what it actually is and what it isn't, and what the impact is and what you can do. So the first is, if you are participating in this, you have a pancreas, right? If you didn't, you wouldn't be with us. Our pancreas and our brain have something in common. They're both organs. So let's say I were diabetic. I could do a ton of research and find out why my pancreas wasn't secreting insulin properly. But I could not then turn around and say, okay, I know, so now pancreas, do it right. It's the same thing with our brain and unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is a function of the organ of our brain. So knowing is not enough. So the first thing I would tell you is, if you are doing any sort of unconscious bias training, you cannot stop with knowing. Knowing is not enough. And in fact, there's research that tells us if you simply share what unconscious bias is and leave it at that, people will behave in more biased ways down the road because they think they are no longer biased. They think, okay, yep, I know what unconscious bias is. I'm no longer biased. Not the way our brain works, right? So you have to hack your biased brain, and you have to understand that everybody's doing it all the time. I love this quote by David Eagleman, and he talks about this idea of naive reality. We believe what we think, what we see, and really all we're doing is holding up a mirror that reflects our own thinking, our own biases, our own world. So one of the most powerful things you can do is understand that. I will tell you, the more I dig in on the neuroscience, the more I do this work, the less I trust a single thing that I think. I always am questioning what else could be true. What's the bias here? I'm going to do a quick exercise with you to demonstrate this. I want you to write down or put a note on your phone, or please don't put anything in chat because I'm not going to ask you to reveal this. You are literally the only person that is ever going to see your response. I'm very quickly going to go through groups of people, and I want you to write down the very first characteristic that comes to mind. Again, do not filter yourself. All right, you ready? David, I want you to do this too. I'm making you work. All right, here we go. An older person. A Muslim man. A mother of young children. A fundamentalist Christian. A person in a wheelchair. A female software engineer. You just took probably the only pop quiz you'll ever take where having no answer was having the right answer. You could not have come up with a characteristic for an entire group of people unless you had first filtered that through your unconscious bias. So why do we do this? Why do we come to these very unconscious decisions about people, situations, decisions? I'm going to do another quick exercise. A newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is a better place than the street. At first, it's better to run than to walk. You may have to try it several times. It takes some skill, but it's easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same thing can also cause problems. One needs lots of room. If there are no complications, it can be very peaceful. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. Like, what? Like that makes zero sense. Unless you know I'm talking about a kite. Now, when you look at all what seems like disparate information, you can very quickly say, yeah, a kite, right? You need a lot of room. You may have to try it. Children can enjoy it. All makes sense. That's what our unconscious bias does for us. That is the function of this of bias, this organ, our brain. It is to very quickly sort and filter information, because we have millions of bits of information coming at us all day long. We would be curled up in a corner, sucking our thumb without unconscious bias. The problem, again, is when we believe what those biases are having us think about different people, situations, abilities, etc. The world was, when we were evolving, this function of our brain worked really well for us. Is this situation safe or not, right? Fight or flight. Should I trust this person? Is this situation physically a risky situation for me, and should I get out or can I stay? Now the world is far more complex, and we're starting to recognize that unconscious bias we're starting to see them in kids as young as 2. And it's everything from media to parenting to education. Every single person is doing this. This is not one person or one group doing something to another group. All of us, all the time, unconscious bias. The impact is that there are both positive and negative biases. So our positive biases are believing, for example, in the workplace that if I am a white, cis, able-bodied man, I have potential for leadership, right? So that's just a really nice tailwind. Whereas, for example, let's say I'm a Black woman or a Black woman with a disability. I have a headwind, right? Really slight, everyday, unconscious microaggressions that I have to overcome. So there's micro affirmations and microaggressions. What that looks like, and again, remember, nobody is doing this on purpose. What that looks like over time in the workplace is a really different experience on the way to the top, right? And we see that the data plays out on this. When you look at who is succeeding in the workplace, you can see those slight helping behaviors. Really, really important point. We don't want to take those tailwinds away, right? So when we're hacking our bias brain, when we're putting bias interrupters in place, instead what it's doing is creating an environment of tailwinds for everyone. It's creating an environment where you believe that everyone is capable, where you're creating environments and cultures where every single person can thrive. And the problem with a lot of this is, first, people don't understand that every single person has bias, not one group doing it to another group. And that we really want it, that this isn't about taking something away, it's about creating an environment for all. So engage your curiosity, engage your leader's curiosity, and have every single person in your organization understand to question their thinking, question what else could be true, what's the bias here, what can I do in this moment to be inclusive? So that's the neuroscience of unconscious bias and inclusion, right? That's hardwired into us, that we have to interrupt and hack our bias brains. Now let's talk about the neuroscience of inclusion nudges. So how to design and deliver programs that aren't spray and pray, that are actually really high functioning, create behavior change. And we've got an infographic around this. Just remind me when you email me to send you the infographic about nudges. So we have the attention span of squirrels. I say sometimes it's like a goldfish around a bowl, right? So and by the way, this is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, which is not surprising to me when we think about, again, how much information is hitting us all day long. So about the longest that we're going to spend watching anything is about 4 minutes before our attention starts to wander, right? And it already has with the 8 seconds. Secondarily, we walk around like zombies a lot of the time. I mean, think about a time when you got in your car and the next thing you knew, you were sitting in a parking lot somewhere. You know, it's someplace that maybe you drive to a lot and you're like, I don't even remember getting here, right? You're absolutely on autopilot about half our life. Why is that? We're protecting our brain. So although it only makes up 2% of the mass, it takes up a lion's share of our oxygen. So our body is looking for ways constantly to protect that big, beautiful brain, right? That's in charge of everything, and save energy. So our habits allow us to do that. Now, there are two things with nudges. It's both the habit reminder, right? So what are you doing to create a cue? It's a little bit like putting your running shoes by the door, right? That you're going to go, or, you know, if you've ever put a sticky note on something to remind yourself. So when you create a nudge of some kind with your programming, what you're doing is kicking off that cue of, oh yeah, I need to take action. And you're limiting the amount of oxygen that is being taken away from the brain, right? It's like, oh, got that. And then the second is designing the content so that it's real quick and really consumable, and you could do it anytime, anywhere. So it's this idea of, I don't have to sit down and watch this half-hour training that, you know, that somebody said I need to do to check a box. I got 2 minutes, right? Or I even have 30 seconds So it also creates this, yeah, we like to be successful. So it's allowing us to consume this in ways that are, that I can continue to be successful. And then, I should be able to do this. The other piece is deliver this to something where it's frictionless. I don't deliver your programming somewhere where I don't have to go log into something. I don't have to put in passwords. I don't have to go through 3, 4 different steps. The very best place you can do that is our phones. We're addicted to this thing. So if you can think about delivering content in a way that is right, ongoing, quick nudges, there's a reminder. Let me just quickly show you an example of this. You're looking at the my phone screen and the home screen of the Everyday Inclusion app, right? So what happens with the app is there's a little thing that pops up that says, I thought, yeah, it's time to get your inclusion tip. You can set when that is. So there's my habit reminder. And then I come in and here's a daily tip. Today's tip is a checklist on how to run an inclusive meeting, right? I can go through very, very quickly and see everything about decision making, idea sharing, how to get participants. I can do that, right? And then I get a little dopamine hit when I finish a piece of content. So, whether it's that or, looking at inclusion interviews or how to create psychological safety or, what are the generations and stereotypes around generations at work, little bitty bits of content all every single day. If you do this, for example, and we've got a 52-week playbook for managers. If they take their teams through one of these things once a week for 52 weeks, at the end of the year, they'll have spent 4.5 hours as a team, right? So little bits delivered bite size somewhere. So think about, do your folks have to log in somewhere? Can you put a tip right there? How can you maybe put a nudge reminder out on Slack or Teams or whatever you use? Use the resources that you have and then break it down, little tiny bite-sized pieces. Ongoing, where there's a consistency to it. That's how you start to create behavior change. Okay, number 3 is thinking about how you motivate me as an individual to take action. Because when we're talking about behavior change, it has to start at the individual level. We have a phenomenal opportunity right now. There's never been a greater workplace experiment than 2020 and 2021. Literally everything is up in the air. So we can redesign things, right? And get people to change and move through the change cycle a lot faster. Because when you seize this moment, you're going to get a lot less of but I've always done it this way, or this feels uncomfortable, or I don't like this. People are already there, right? It's uncomfortable. They're doing work in a new way. So everything's up in the air. When everything comes back, make it more inclusive. To do that, to get me as an individual, we often want people to do this because it's the right thing to do, right? It matches our core values. Or I see a lot of companies talking about the business case. Well, that's cool, but it's not going to change my individual behavior, because behavior change is hard, right? Think about, again, that example of healthy lifestyle, right? I have to make choices all day long. When you're asking me to behave in an inclusive way, I got to know what's in it for me. So anchor your programming in really solid change management foundations where you're communicating again and again and again what's in it for them to be inclusive. we say when you're talking to at the individual contributor level, have the conversation about people that get along, get ahead, right? If you're able to bring out the best of your teammates, you're going to do better work. Your team's going to do better work. That's going to be recognized. We're seeing, and David, I don't know if you're seeing this, we're seeing a lot more companies that are starting to have performance metrics, particularly for team leaders and managers around diversity and inclusion. So, and your team leaders really have an oversized impact here too. So having them understand this is going to make you look at, and oh, by the way, I'm going to go a little more into the neuroscience for them to avoid cortisol. Is they are not going to want to have a conversation about an inclusion incident that happened on their team, right? So we're paying attention to this. You're going to look good if you do well on this, and there's going to be some repercussion if you don't. David, are you seeing that trend as well?
Oh, 100%, right? Well, the measurement's always been one of my beefs, right? And so a lot of companies just they're afraid to take those types of steps because I think in some cases they're afraid of what will happen once they have that data that justifies or is presented to them. So I do see that as being a trend, and it's definitely and it's actually comforting in a way, because I think when we start putting some of these managers or some of these leaders accountable, then now they're, now they do change, and
Absolutely.
if they do change because it's accountable, although the humanitarian in me would still like them to just do it because that's the way it should be done, but I'll take change any way we can get it. If we have to twist somebody's arm, then let's do it, right?
Yeah, and I think we know that getting people to do it because it's the right thing to do hasn't worked, right? So
Yeah.
there's got to be what we almost always see missing is tying it back and having people understand it's actually good for your career, right? This isn't warm and fuzzy. This isn't. We have all kinds of data and stats around this, and in particular, look up the picture of the team that took a photo of the black hole. I often share that photo because in that photo you see this incredibly diverse team, and then when you dig into the story behind it, the team environment that they created was really inclusive, and they were able to take a picture of the black hole. So it's not just here's what's good for me in my career, but here's what it feels like on this team, and here's the cool work that you can do. And again, remind me, we've got an infographic on this at the individual level, at the team level, at the org level. Literally everybody wins when we behave in inclusive ways.
Yeah. Maureen, there was a chat asking about the app. Having not done this presentation with you, I'm assuming we'll get there.
Oh,
How do they get a hold of it?
yep.
Okay.
And they can either just email info@moxieexchange.com, and we can give them a private demo if they'd like, or just go out to the moxieexchange.com, and we've got all kinds of information on it. The other thing to think about is, so making me look good, having me understand that, and then incentivizing behaviors. It's really easy to incentivize the wrong behaviors when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So, for example, in the app, we've built in badge sharing, right? Where you can, but it's not about binging content, right? So if you binge a bunch of content, that's not going to create behavior change. Instead, you can earn a badge for number of days in a streak, or for favoriting things, or for completing little knowledge quests, right? Things that show that you're ongoing interacting with the content. So also think about, how are you grounding things in change management? And then how are you incentivizing behaviors? Again, through the app, we chose to incentivize through the gaming and badge sharing. But what are some other things that you're doing, and how can you tie that back to goals for their own career and for their teams? We've got organizations that are using the app that they're actually doing badge sharing, like friendly competition. right? So they're setting some goals around that. So think about this, this, you can also bring a lot of joy to this work, right? And so when you're thinking about setting those goals and something like a gamification, have some fun with it. You brought up measurement, David. It's like you like you have seen this presentation before, which I know that you haven't. You got to track the data that matters. I will, one of the things that's it's often called vanity data when you're sharing your diversity data. And by the way, again, literally not changed in 30 years, right? Because we haven't done a bunch of the things that we just talked about. So let's talk about measuring what really does matter. If you're going to measure diversity, you had better measure inclusion. And inclusion and engagement are different. There are a lot of organizations that are doing engagement surveys. Awesome. You should absolutely do that. But understand that a core driver of engagement is belonging. And if you're not measuring inclusion and belonging, you're missing the boat. I'm going to use myself as an example. I worked for a company that I loved. I was highly engaged. If you had taken me through the Gallup 12, David, I would have checked every single box. I had best friends there. They were investing in me. I was being promoted. I loved that company and I loved the work that I was doing. And then I had my daughter and I no longer felt that I belonged. I was still engaged, still loved the company, still loved my work, but I would show up and I would feel that those gentle headwinds of maternal bias. I looked up and saw my next level of promotion. There were no mothers, right? There were no, and so as soon as I felt that I didn't belong, I quit, right? So I would have checked every box on your engagement survey. You have to measure the emotion of belonging. This is not a 1 to 5, right? This is, what a green smiley face looks like versus a red. And then think about asking questions, demographic questions that will allow you to see some of the nuance in this. Because oftentimes you can have an overall picture and it's very different when you dig into intersectionality. It might feel one way for white men, it might feel another way for Black women. And know that if you ask straight up demographic data, you're probably not going to get it. So ask something like, my response to these questions was influenced by my race, positively, negatively, no impact, right? And then you can, as one client said, then you can get in there and double click, right? And find out what's going on. If you're seeing a bunch of people saying, yeah, it was influenced. I'm going to share what this looks like. So you're looking at the backside of our dashboards, where if you think about getting this pulse survey data, right? 5 questions. I feel like I'm included and belong on my team. I feel like I'm included and belong at this company. I can get in there and sort by role and by location and see at the individual contributor level in the Toronto office, I've got a whole bunch of reds and yellows. I better get in there before we have a retention issue, right? That very expensive turnover. Conversely, wow, we're seeing, in this role, this location, a bunch of greens. Let's get in there and find out what those best practices are, right? So we can figure out, what is that leader doing? What is that team doing? And how can we take some of those best practices and use those across the organization? The other thing, when you're thinking about delivering that nudge content, whatever content that you have, what we want to do the old school way is we want to say, I want to know who all got through the program and whether they finished the assessment at the end. That's not sticky. for compliance training, sure, you might need to do that, right? To say everybody got through. But when you're talking about behavior change and creating inclusive ongoing behaviors, you want to be measuring how people are interacting with your content, right? So for example, with the app, we're looking at, hey, are people favoriting content, right? That's showing that they're seeing something, they're really engaged with that, and they want to go back and either share that with their team, or it's something that they know, like, for example, today's tip was around that inclusive meeting checklist. Gosh, I'm running a meeting next week. I'm going to put that in favorites so I can go access it. The other thing is, are they searching for content? And anything that any database or any content that you're allowing people to search for, please make sure it's vetted, best practice based, research based. I call it the cesspool of Google. The last place you want people searching for content around DEI is out on Google. There's terrible, terrible misinformation out there, flat out wrong information. They got to sort through. So let's say you have an internal LMS. If you can find out sort of what the content people are accessing and looking for, because then you can deliver really targeted programming. So the app, for example, we are able to track what are people searching for, what terms, and then what parts of the app are they actually accessing. So what that looks like is I'm able to have my people tell me what information they actually need, right? So I can go in, for example, we've got a client who they have, they're seeing a lot of people doing search around ageism and generations in the workforce. So they're getting in there, again, double click, what's going on, right? Are we seeing that there are issues around ageism happening? And now we can go in and we can deliver really targeted programming. We can have really targeted conversations versus guessing and saying, we think everyone should go through unconscious bias training, right? So measure what matters, measure that emotion of inclusion, and then get that predictive data that allows you to get ahead of things and then deliver content that's really, really specifically what your folks need. So last but not least, psychological safety. So in all of this, the wrapper around everything that we've talked about is having an environment where people can go there when something is said or done that is exclusionary. Because companies don't exclude, people do. And when you're creating this environment, which is often the case where we hear something and like everybody freaks out, right? We hear something, and then what ends up happening is the person that, remember we talked about impact, the person that's impacted by that is left to feel othered, is left to feel excluded. And then that's why we start to see the turnover, right? That's why we start to see that 87% of employees are disengaged. And why don't we speak up, right? We're afraid, right? We walk around on eggshells. We're taught to be polite, all of these things. Well, what's worse is leaving that person to feel excluded. So in order for people to stop walking on eggshells, to just ignore things, to not speak up, you have to, and this should happen at the team level, you have to have conversations to say, hey, listen, we know this is going to happen. We're, everybody is on this journey. We're never going to get this right. I share examples all the time with the Moxie team of mistakes that I make. I did a LinkedIn post sharing, here are 3 mistakes that I made in the past 3 weeks, because we want people to understand, like anything, you have to learn your way through. You have to learn your way through this. And it's what happens after something has been said or something's been done that's most important. So, excuse me, my spring allergies are killing me. This takes some courage. And it takes conversation up front to say, hey, we're gonna have a growth mindset about this. I often refer people to Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. Um, yep, things are going to be said, things are going to be done. Then we have to actually go there. We have to have that conversation. And we've got another two tools actually around how you create that safety, and then a very specific framework for how to have conversations around DEI. Crucial conversations doesn't cut it here. There are actually two steps that are very particular to inclusion that are missed in that framework. So have the conversation, say, we're all on a journey. We know mistakes are going to be made, and we're going to have those conversations because it's more important to us that as a team, we learn and grow and make sure we're creating that environment where everyone can thrive. David, I feel like I just covered a whole lot of ground. We talked about everything from understanding the neuroscience of unconscious bias and inclusion, how to design programs that trigger action and are bite-sized nudges, thinking about change management, what's in it for me, and then incentivizing those right behaviors, whether that's through gamification or something else, measuring what matters, right? Measuring the emotion of inclusion, and then getting some other, like, let your people tell you the programming, the tools, the conversations they need to be having, and then create that psychological safety.
Yeah.
I think we've got a couple minutes for questions, maybe not.
Yeah, there is a question in the Q&A that you might want to take a look at. Truthfully, you're much more of an expert than I am on that. So, but it's funny that that you alluded to, me joked about me seeing this presentation before based off a benchmark, or based off of pulling data, because when I originally reached out to you, it was about a women in leadership program, and it was about extending it over a longer period of time. And
Yes.
it seems like that resonates fairly well with you as well, right? So
Yeah.
bite-sized learning over a long period of time,
Ongoing.
ongoing.
And we're like, this is something that we're never done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're never, again, back to that healthy lifestyle. When you're thinking about your inclusion programming, your inclusion approach, you're never ever done. Ongoing, little, and again, make it so. We've got a supervisor at Mayo Clinic that she's using the nudges in her daily huddles, right? Just like here's just a real quick, because it has to be. You have to take this and really weave it into the fabric of your culture and your organization, and put it in the hands of every single employee versus the top down. Okay, so let me read this. Diverse. For the reach outs tokenism. Connected to diverse college groups, reach out and make sure they know we're here as a recruiting resource. So I'd need to understand a little bit more. I think if the tokenism comes, if there's tokenism comes when it's we're bringing somebody in, we're doing something that's really performative and doesn't have the ongoing, how does everybody benefit from this long term? How does it fit into a larger strategy? I'd need to know a little bit more, and I'm super happy to, if you want to reach out to me to get a little bit more detail. There's probably some nuance here that I'm happy to help you with.
You know what else was, thank you for that, Maureen, but you know what else was really interesting? Hate to bring the comedy channel into this equation, but
why not?
but Trevor Noah, who does the Daily Show and is from South Africa, and talks about racism, and one of the things that Trevor said in between interviews, he often goes on a rant. And he said people just need to have conversations, and they don't always end. Sometimes you hurt people's feelings, and sometimes it might not go right. But at the end of the day, you get the you can appreciate for where these people are coming from. And I think in North America, I think our culture is okay, we're going to create policy. Now let's just not talk about it. Let's just follow policy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, great example of that, David. And I would say, and I love Trevor Noah, and it can't be one conversation,
No, yeah,
right? Like this, it's these ongoing, because again, right, this is day in, this is day out. There are a couple of things with that. One is I have to make sure if I am somebody, so I have to understand my privilege, and I say spend your privilege, right? Like we could do a whole thing on privilege because people feel a certain sort of way about it. Because again, usually
right.
it's not addressed well. Um, but I need to educate myself, right? Instead of putting the burden on somebody from an underrepresented group, right? Like my daughter, um, she's a dwarf. Right? You saw that in the picture. The questions that she gets, instead of people saying, you know what, I can get educated, and then I can ask the question to say, hey, what's inclusive for you? Right? I've been doing X, Y, and Z. Is that inclusive for you, or
Mm,
should I do that a different way? Right? And again, that's where creating that psychological safety, but also having the base knowledge, the base tools, and again, engaging our curiosity. I always, curiosity is an inclusion superpower, right? So
mhm,
if we can lead with curiosity, understand that this is ongoing, right? And that like traditional methods just aren't going to work, right? We need to hack our biased brains. We need to deliver. We need to measure. We need to create ongoing, ongoing, ongoing. So I think, if you're in an industry that has a safety program, take a playbook from your safety program, right? Because safety programs that are done well embed so many of the things that I just talked about, right? It's ongoing. I understand what's in it for me. Um, so, and deliver again.
mhm.
There's a big shift here in terms of what's good for your employees versus, oh, I want to measure this thing, or I want to control this thing, versus you got to put it in their hands.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So there is a couple questions in the chat here. So, what approach do you recommend for rolling this out to employees? Is it typically optional,
Uh,
inviting them to download and have a cascade from there?
Yeah, so I think that's again, the research tells us that when it comes to diversity and inclusion programming, if you make things mandatory, they will not be effective, right? Because everybody hates compliance training, right? And so they put on their compliance training hat versus that change management, what's in it. We actually have a whole bunch of rollout communication toolkits, right, that are around. This is and it's been really fun seeing different organizations have rolled it out so many different ways, oftentimes starting with employee resource groups, or starting with the team leaders and managers, and really positioning it as a benefit, right?
Mm,
What if you're more inclusive, you're going to get ahead, right? Some of those things that we talked about, and then building in some of the gamification, like, oh, somebody just sent me a badge, I want to know what that's about and how can I earn a badge. Great question.
And then
Window-
there's another question here. Is there a way to win the battle against window dressing, or does one have to be way up the food chain to see it?
if I understand that, when you're saying window dressing, uh, if are are you meaning like performative stuff?
Yeah, that to me, I guess, um, I interpret that as, is there a way window dressing as C-suite just really wanting to check the boxes to say
Yeah,
they did something,
yeah,
right?
that's
So,
that's the performative stuff. You know, David, I've been asked the question. I love this question. What company is doing this really well? and I say no company is doing this really well. There are pockets across all companies that are doing this well. So thinking about, even within a division or within a team, there can be very, very different cultures. Quite frankly, that's one of the reasons that I had the light bulb moment when I was speaking at a conference and I walked out and everybody had their phone in their hand. I was like, my gosh, this is a tool that shifts access, focus, and control out of C-suite, out of HR, out of DEI, out of training, and puts it right in people's hands. So I think you said this, David, I don't care what gets people to the table as long as they get to the table, and then give them tools. And that might be at the team level. Your C-suite, depending, might always stay at check the box. But I will say this, I don't think that's going to be the case for much longer. There's literally nowhere to hide when it comes to this anymore. Here in the US, right, NASDAQ is not going to list companies unless they've got a diverse board. Glassdoor is going to start allowing people to, with their company reviews, share demographic data, right? So, Fairy Godboss already, I can go on Fairy Godboss and see what it's like to work at a company as a woman. And so the pressure is from all sides, whether that's boards, whether that's investors, whether that's employees, whether that's customers, potential employees. What may be getting them to the table is, we got to fix this or we're going to start to lose a lot of money and a lot of customers. Great. I don't care. As long as they get there, and then give people the tools where they can create real sustained inclusive teams and cultures.
Yeah, and truly, I think that the demographic shift in the workforce is going to help too, right? 75% by 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials.
Yeah.
So
here's some interesting, and I'm just looking back on this. Yeah. So everything that we were just talking about, the window dressing, like more than pins and t-shirts, and it's doing everything that we just talked about, right? Grounding and curiosity and nudges and understanding, like ongoing. David, interestingly, so I'm Gen X. My generation was supposed to fix this, right? Because of unconscious bias, a generation coming into the workforce isn't going to change it. And in fact, the Harvard Implicit Association assessment, they're finding that millennials are scoring as more biased than other generations. Again, because they think, right, that danger of thinking that you're woke, that danger of thinking because the biology is still giving us, right, we're still making these decisions based on unconscious bias, every single group. So generation isn't going to fix this, right? It's just going to look different. So we have to hack our biased brains, deliver those nudges ongoing. So I super, super appreciate, I know that you've got another session that's about to start. We went a little bit over. I appreciate you all joining, and David, I appreciate so much you having me on.
It was wonderful, Maureen. I got to tell you, I'm happy I found you, and I was excited to see this and look forward to continued conversations. So we will record this, or this is being recorded. Everybody will give you a copy to the link, Maureen. If it's okay with you, we can share the power or the deck. And so we can get that out to you, and we'll throw out some contact information in that email. So if anybody wants to reach out to Maureen or myself and get further information or resources, always happy to help. Okay.
Thank you so much, everybody. And feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm out there quite a bit, and we've got the series there as well. So get out there and create a more inclusive world, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Maureen. Bye now.